What would you say if I told you bad posture is less about a problem with muscles and joints and more about how your brain is computing your environment? Before you click off, hear me out. Your brain and nervous system are computing everything that's going on within you and around you right now. The temperature, sounds, stress, digesting your last meal, just as some examples. And if some of those, and from many other areas, contain undetected stress signals, your muscles will get the signal to alter their tone. What would you also say if I told you that we can upgrade some of those signals so the stress signals become fewer and further between? I'm going to show you how we might start to do that. By the way, I'm Adam, and for the last 20 years I've helped people move better and feel better by understanding how their nervous system is performing. I'll illustrate this point by telling you a quick story, and a story about myself. I had recurring neck pain. It would lock up and I would manage it. Sometimes it would be a bit of a problem, but most of the time I would be okay. And I was using typical physiotherapy type approaches to manage it. And then I met a practitioner, and when I lay on this person's table, I was actually in some degree of pain on that particular day and was experiencing significant restrictions in rotation of my head and neck. He did a whole series of tests and found that the most consistent thing that upset my whole body, my whole system, was exposure to blue light. Now, before you think that I'm crazy, let me explain. The blue light was nothing magical. The blue light was simply an input to my nervous system that gave it a stress signal. And when I experience that stress signal, everything in my body goes weak. So that system, that phenomenon, is called calcium dependent inactivation. So it's a fancy term. It means that we can no longer produce muscle contractions efficiently. So I did the upgrades to help make my nervous system accept this blue light, and without doing anything else, I increased my range of motion by about 50% on the spot. So in that room on that day, 5 minutes later, I'd increased 50% in range of motion in my neck. That is one example of when the nervous system and the brain is computing something and it's receiving stress signals. Now, the mechanism behind how and why that works is probably outside of the scope of this video, but that's just one example. So visual inputs and optimizing visual system would be one of the first things I would look at when we come to bad posture, because without good visual stimulus, and without the visual system, your eyes, working well, then we are going to be much more likely to be subject to poor posture. So in this particular instance, you could do the same thing. I'll put a link in the description to the app for the light that I used. And what we'd want to do is cover the eye and expose ourselves to the light. It's a full screen of a color. If you put it on the full spectrum mode, it'll run through a whole series of colors. Go through once through that series, bring the phone away. Go all the way through that series of colors a second time, and then a third time to what we call potentiate that pathway, and then you can come over and do exactly the same process on the other eye, and that increases the voltage that you are able to withstand, essentially, within the nervous system. So the second story I want to tell you is of a client who I was actually working with on the rehab side. He'd had a knee replacement, full knee replacement, and we'd done some great work with his rehab. He'd gone all the way through the acute phase doing his rehab, and he'd got to a point where he was on his back, but he couldn't straighten his leg beyond about 110 degrees. So pretty significantly tight. And I thought at this point, having met this person that had worked on my neck, I would go along with the client and see what this nervous system stuff could do for him. The knee was checked. The knee itself mechanically was working well. The foot was checked below, was working well. The hip was working pretty well. It wasn't until the practitioner got up to the diaphragm that some significant imbalances became apparent. And about 5-10 minutes later, after having had some work on the diaphragm, this client lay back down on the couch and the leg went almost to 180 degrees, about 170 degrees it was. And the client, I'll never forget, I won't repeat the words, but he was amazingly, he was surprised, let's just say that. And so he jumped up off the table. He had immediately much better function through the knee, but also the lower back and everything else that was compensating for what was going on with the knee. Now, there's no magic with what was going on with the diaphragm particularly, but the diaphragm had been compensating presumably for many, many, many years, and it was holding lots of tension globally through the body, and everything else was having to compensate. So there were very weak bits and there were very tight, restricted bits. In relieving and working on the diaphragm, it opened up a whole system that was just not functioning that well before. So to work on the diaphragm, to get the diaphragm working efficiently, we can contract each area of the diaphragm to its shortest possible length. Now, when you do that, you increase its efficiency. So I'll show you how we can do that now. So we can go down into flexion with the body. We can rotate to the left and tip to the right. As you do that, you're putting the front right side of your diaphragm in a shortened position. And from there, you think about pushing pressure down towards your pelvic floor. Imagine you're constipated and you need to push down to move that bowel movement. That's what you'd want to do, focusing on the right hand side. After each rep, if you can relax and see if you can flex down more or side bend more, you're going to get even closer to that shortest possible position. If you do 3 reps in that position, 3 reps in that position, and then you can do the back half of the diaphragm by setting up in a hinged hip position, extending the thoracic spine, rotating to the same side and tipping to the same side. Now when you push down, you're thinking about pushing from here down, particularly the side that you're rotated and side bent toward. That's the side that you want to be thinking about pushing down. So that's going to work all 4 quadrants of that diaphragm and make it more efficient to contract. Now, the third story I want to tell you is of a client who came to see me, and he sat down on the bench. I'll never forget it. He sat down on the bench. It was a Monday morning. It was 9 o'clock, and he said, I was in a beer garden yesterday and I reached for my drink and my back just locked up. I said, okay, let's have a look at your rotation. And he put a dowel rod across his shoulders and he went, yeah, that's what I've got. And I said, wow, that is some restriction. And for a whole host of reasons, I decided that the skin was going to be the first place we would check, because he was so tight. There was a whole body response to this tension that he was feeling. It wasn't 1 or 2 muscles that were tense. The whole body was so tight. And so I went and I treated his skin, just the response to skin touch, like you would get from a massage. And within 5 minutes, the client had about 60 degrees range of motion, both left and right. 5 minutes, 10 minutes maximum. And he was gobsmacked again, to say the least. Now, the skin and the tactile response that we get and the inputs that we get from your skin are, as you can see from this story, incredibly significant to the nervous system. So to improve what's going on from this tactile response, what we can do is we can close the eyes and we can go through an area and just work through a small patch of skin on both sides. Give it 30 seconds. You can cover one area multiple times. You don't need to press, you're not rubbing, you're not trying to roll the skin or any of those massage techniques. You're literally just treating the response to skin touch. If you can work through the whole body like that over a couple of sessions, you'll find that your body, if you are struggling with that series of information coming into your nervous system, will open up fairly significantly sometimes. So to measure yourself, you can either do the seated rotation test, like so, or with your hands out in front, or you can do it standing with your feet together and just check your first point of restriction that you feel in the body. At what point do you start to notice that it feels like you're tightening up? Don't go for maximum range with momentum. Obviously you're going to get quite far around, and that's not going to be an effective test before and after, but feel for that first point of restriction. Once you've treated the skin, how does that open the system up? So I hope those 3 stories were somewhat interesting, but also illustrate how important the nervous system is to posture and optimal function. For details of coaching, please check the link in the description, and I'll see you soon.